Jihadist militant group ISIS has called on Muslims to travel to Iraq and Syria to help build an Islamic state. In an audio message, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi called on Muslims to immigrate to the Islamic State, saying it was their duty. ISIS says that it is forming an Islamic State or a caliphate on the territories that it controls in Iraq and Syria. The Sunni jihadist audio mentions India, with the ISIS chief vowing war against several nations, including India, where Muslim rights, it claims, are also being suppressed. Well, let's go straight across to my colleague Amitabh Revi, who's been covering the war from Erbil in the north of Iraq, in the Kurdistan area. Amitabh, it's a question we've been asking you every single day. The condition or the status of the Indians, many of whom are hostage in cities like Tikrit or Mosul.
Yes, we heard that news yesterday, which was quite disturbing, of the nurses in Tikrit, because there is fighting going on there. We're still getting very sketchy reports of who exactly is in control. The Iraqi military, both on ground assault and with helicopter gunships, has been attacking the area to try and reclaim Saddam Hussein's hometown. And the ISIS claims that they have not been able to do that. So the problem with the nurses in Tikrit is that they have to move southwards about 160 to 180 kilometers from Tikrit to Baghdad to fly out of safety. And that road itself is not certain that it's controlled by the Iraqi forces, and hence they still have to stay put.
Which specifically targets India among other countries. Can you share some more details about that? What's the threat? What is the message?
Well, the message, this is the first public message, in fact, by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who is now the Caliph of Ismail, as he calls himself, self-proclaimed. But what's interesting is this double-pronged offensive. We know about the military offensive. Everyone knows about that. But there is an equally fast lightning movement online, which the jihadists are operating on, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Facebook, whether it's YouTube, where they, in fact, put on their videos of Raqqa, that's their self-proclaimed capital of the caliphate, and they've shown how they parade their armaments there. Now, as soon as those accounts are taken down, they're back as fast as they can. So, when you're talking about India, in that message of Ramzan, and he calls himself Amirul Mu'minin, and we remember who last called himself that, Mullah Umar, of course, and there is that intra-jihadi fight that is also going on. To get a clearer picture of what exactly it means, this declaration of the caliphate, whether they have any legitimacy, they have large areas of land which they are controlling. But what about in the future? We spoke to Sam Morris, who's an area expert here in MERI, the Middle East Research Institute in Erbil. The announcement of the declaration of a caliphate, now there seems to be one view, which is that it's the most significant jihadist declaration since 9/11, and another view that it could be a lot of propaganda, a lot of bluster. Where do you stand? Also?
Well, what you're seeing at the moment is a rebranding of an organisation that's rebranded itself many times since its inception to fit its political and strategic strategies. Here, obviously, it's a lot different because they're calling for the establishment have called for the establishment of the caliphate with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi as a caliph. Now, it's a strategic move, and it's obviously symbolic on the first day of Ramadan as well. But there are pros and cons for the organisation. So it's no longer ISIS, it's IS.
Which is interesting, because in the English-speaking community there was a lot of, is it ISIS, is this ISIL, what exactly is it?
Yeah.
And they're very media savvy, they're using all these languages, so maybe one of the reasons?
Well, possibly. I mean, ISIS, ISIL, and now IS have historically been very, very savvy using Twitter, internet, multiple languages, drawing in its PR from around the world to draw on young fighters from the West. And there are a lot of international fighters at the moment, 500 alone, roughly, from Britain. These are figures that are really hard to verify.
The Americans, what role do you see there? There seems to be some talk that possibly the advisors and the intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance that they are providing could have helped the Iraqis fight back. I am not sure whether that's actually true. But how do you visualize America playing in this field?
Well, it's tricky. It's an ultimate failure at the moment for America, because if you see what's happening, and America at the moment are doing as little as possible almost, you know, small amount of special forces and advisory troops, some reconnaissance, sure, But it's at the tricky situation where across the border, or lack of border, in Syria, it's been at loggerheads with Iran, it's been loggerheads with Russia over what to do there. Now, you just cross a border, and they're now, all three are theoretically backing the same side. So strategically, geopolitically, America are in a really tough position right now. And with Syria in Al-Qaim providing air support and bombing targets before the Americans got around to doing it, the whole geopolitics of the region is really quite confusing and fluid indeed.
So an extremely interesting point being made there, that Iran, the US and Russia, who are opposing sides when it came to Syria, are backing the same side when it comes to Iraq. The question now, are reports true that Abu al-Baghdadi and others are on President Obama's kill list? They are flying manned drones here. Will they use those when they are so hesitant to use any kind of force in Iraq as of now?
All right, Amitabh, thanks very much. Amitabh Revi joining us live there from Erbil. Well, let's get a larger perspective of where this is. We'll also discuss perhaps the threat made to India by ISIS. Joining me now, Harris Gardner, South Asia correspondent for the New York Times. Thanks very much for being with us. Ambassador G. Parthasathy, thanks. Familiar face on NDTV. And Dr. Wael Awad, West Asia expert. Mr. Gardner, let me come to you first. Is it now almost inevitable that the US has to strike? There doesn't seem to be any military option other than that.
I certainly hope not. I mean, coming to Americans for advice about Iraq, I think we've demonstrated that we keep making the wrong call, it seems to me. But I think that there, as you have sort of said, there is a huge sort of political buildup in Washington and around the world even. You start seeing all the Americans have to do something. Things are going south. Why doesn't the United States do something? And that does take on a life of its own. I think it's unfortunate. I think in this larger discussion, Mr. Ambassador here will talk about it a little bit here, but this is a completely fluid, anarchic situation that it seems to me it's very hard to envision how some American troops can actually create order out of this chaos. But I think it will be very difficult for this administration to sit around and do nothing.
Yeah. Would you agree that it is possibly just a matter of time before we do see, at the very least, American airstrikes? They've committed 700 odd soldiers. That's not enough to make a difference. But airstrikes.
No, but let me put it in more perspective. Like there was no Al Qaeda in Iraq prior to 2003. We all agree on this. The 2003, when the American troop moved in, they dissolved the army. They dissolved the police, they dissolved the Ba'ath Party. So you left Iraq into a chaos. So you allowed the growing of insurgency and militia groups and infiltration into the border of Iraq, the porous border of Iraq, neighboring country, and you left it in a lawless state. Now, this is the culmination of a policy, wrong policy by the United States for 10 years in Iraq, which has been reached to this stage of more dangerous area.
Right.
Now, the American has the moral responsibility, and the Britishers as well, to ensure the stability of Iraq is retained, A, and B, this kind of ISIS or IS Bilad Sham is the same group which have already promoted by Al Qaeda in Afghanistan, and then they have promoted themselves Jabhat al-Nusra in Syria, and then now they are taking the lead in doing. I think the American will do the drone culture, which is now the new century, on the new decades of the drone culture. They will have some kind of resort and attack on some target within Syria, within Iraq. But at the same time, they wanted also to put pressure on Maliki, to allow Maliki to give some compromise. A, for the new government they are forming. B, for also concession on the privatization of the Iraqi oil, which was one of the conditions. C is also allowing military bases of the United States in Iraq, which was denied at the earlier by the Maliki government itself.
Ambassador Parthasathy, I just want to focus on the India angle in all of this. Before we talk about the threat that ISIS possibly poses to India directly, because that's been a threat now, you still see a scenario where where there are Indians who want to go back to Iraq, number one. And number two, you see the government of India in a desperate situation, not really knowing how or when to pull out Indian citizens in that country.
Let's understand what these people have said, and let's not get overexcited about the reference to India. They have, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi has said that they will target countries where Muslim rights have been seized. which means India, which means
but
Russia.
It names India specifically.
It names Russia, it names
Indonesia.
It names China, it
Yes.
names Philippines.
Yes.
It names moderate Muslim countries from Indonesia to Algeria and Morocco. Now, this is, the fact of the matter is, this is different from Al-Qaeda,
Yes.
whose targets were very clear. Bin Laden formed the International Islamic Front for jihad against Jews and Crusaders, Israel and the West. These fellows are not saying that. But the actions they are taking have caused concern in pro-Western countries, including Saudi Arabia. There are now two more aspects. One, with regards to who should intervene. My own feeling is that this is a small group, and politically the Sunnis of Iraq don't want this.
Absolutely.
So politically and diplomatically you will have to work to split them, because most of the tribals who fought General Petraeus are not with these guys. So split the Sunnis, and what they want is a political settlement, and that is something the Iraqis will have to solve. You can't have Maliki sitting on the chair, unacceptable to the Sunnis, who are some 30% of the population or 20% of the population, and not particularly loved by the Kurds.
Right.
So first there has to be an internal political settlement, and I would think it's only fools who rush in where angels fear to tread.